Okay, so I would like to go ahead and get started since we are at MIT time. So welcome to the Teaching Development Fellows Network information session. Um, for those of you who don't already know me, my name is Ben Hansberry. I am the Associate Director for Graduate Student Teaching at the Teaching and Learning Lab, and I run this program along with my colleague Natalie, who was going to join us, but unfortunately her son has gotten her sick, so she's not going to be able to join us today. So it'll just be me, and then we also have a stealth guest who will be joining us or sharing a little bit of her experience with us as we go through the meeting. So what I want to do in this meeting is give you all a little bit of a more sense of like what the Teaching Development Fellows Network is, as well as talk a little bit about how the selection process works, what makes for a strong application, and then answer any questions that you all have. I am recording this session so that we can have the video be available for folks who weren't able to join us today but still want this information. So I hope that's all right. So I'd like to start with a little bit of an interactive slide. So if you can use the annotation tools on the share screen to just drop a shape on which image you think best describes your perception of teaching, graduate teaching in your department. An orchestra director, one child being helped while another child drowning, flowers in a garden, mother possum, a beach chair, or a group of kids putting their hands together. In your Zoom options, there should be an annotate, which should bring up some ways to mark the slide. Okay, flowers, flowers. Any others? Okay. So that's good. I mean, it's nice that there's two like positive ones. Sometimes people circle like specifically the drowning kid, or one of those the baby possum that's like currently falling off the mother's back. So it's good to see that that is that is there's a positive image for some of the folks who are here. The reason why we start with this short little activity is because one of the things that are the sort of areas of expertise that we want teaching development fellows to bring into the program with them is this sense of like, what is graduate teaching like in my department? What sorts of additional support do my peer graduate students need in order to be successful teachers? So I'll clear the annotations here. So a little bit of background on the Teaching Development Fellows Network. The aim of the program is to provide relevant and department-specific training and professional development workshops in teaching and learning to departments. It was launched in 2019 with a group of 6 fellows from 5 departments. The program has sort of like had some big years and some smaller years. Since then, we've had as many as 25 fellows in the past. This year's cohort has 9 fellows, which are serving 8 different departments, representing 4 of the 5 schools, including one at-large fellow who isn't situated in his department primarily, but has like a topic that he is trying to address institute-wide. So just to give us an overview of this session, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what the philosophy and the aims of the programs are, and then try to give you a kind of synoptic, broad view of what TDFs do. Then we have a TDF who's going to share a little bit about her experience, and then we'll have a Q&A break to ask any questions that you have about like the scope or the activities of the program. And then after that, we will talk into maybe some of the details, what the time commitment looks like, what sorts of support you would get as a fellow, and what the application process looks like, as well as then sort of a Q&A about how the application and selection process works. So the philosophy of the program is to be interdisciplinary and flexible and to foreground graduate student leadership. So I'll kind of unpack these in reverse order, sort of starting with graduate student leadership. Graduate students know the ins and outs of teaching in their discipline, as well as the needs of their peers. So, it would be possible for someone like me to like bounce around to each department and, give a teaching workshop for just the graduate students in that department as they needed it. And that would be okay. But I don't know what it's like to be in each of your departments. I don't know what the particular teaching norms are. I don't know what the particular needs of graduate student teachers are. And so I would only be able to approach things from a pretty broad, abstract perspective. But of course, the people who do know all of those details are the graduate students themselves. So one of the sort of this program is designed to try to encourage and support graduate students in bringing their interest and knowledge of teaching, their sort of situational knowledge about what is the situation in their department together so that they can be a kind of leader in teaching in their department. The program is also very flexible. So the diversity at MIT means that programs like this have to be flexible because there are different grad program structures, different teaching opportunities, different teaching cultures. Um, so in general, I will say that, while we at the TLL have certain goals that we want graduate students in this program, teaching development fellows, to try to pursue, we tend to be pretty flexible and pretty receptive to graduate students' perception of like what is the best way to achieve those goals. We have guidance and structures that are available for you if you want them, but we also really want to promote fellows who say, you know what, I actually have this other idea that I think will work. I'll give you an example of this from my time running this program. Uh, Several years ago now, there was a graduate student in AeroAstro who wanted to design a kind of like competitive micro teaching, basically, a teach off, he called it, where people would teach these short 10-minute lessons and then get, scored based on some rubric that he would design. And then there would be like a prize or bragging rights or something for whoever won. And when he first was describing this idea to me, I thought, I don't think that's going to work. That seems like you're asking for like a lot. People do a lot of extra work, and I think probably just no one's going to sign up, and it's going to be a real downer of an event when it actually happens. And then it happened, and it was the most attended, most successful event of the entire year. So I think that speaks to both the sort of what the program gains from its flexibility, like being open to graduate students taking the lead on some of these things, and also an awareness that he had about what would work in his problem that I didn't have. Um, and so then the final thing is that it is an interdisciplinary cohort. So this allows us to kind of share lessons learned and problem solved across the institute. So one of my favorite things that happens in the TDF program is when we're having meetings of fellows and someone says, oh, we're really dealing with this or that teaching problem in my department. And another person says, oh, 3 years ago, we had the same thing. Here's the system that we designed in order to respond to that. So there's this opportunity in a place that is as siloed as MIT to get together with people from outside your department who may not know, but who are also committed to teaching and to share the insights that you've gained from teaching in those different contexts. Okay, so what do TDFs do? Each semester, fellows develop and implement about 1 to 3 projects. Again, the flexibility of the program and the nature of the projects will really determine like how many things a fellow will do. But I think more important than like doing a certain number of projects or holding a certain number of events is that we want fellows to be thinking about these 2 broad goals: to disseminate relevant information about and the practice of effective evidence-based teaching. So taking some things that you might learn with your experience at the TLL and bringing it to your peers in your departments, as well as encouraging the development of a stronger culture of reflective teaching in each department. What I think our hope is that graduate students will start to approach each other and engage each other in teaching conversations, even if it's just like, I'm not really sure how to plan this thing in my recitation, and that it will occur to them to go to their peer graduate students to ask them what they think, and that these conversations about being a reflective teacher will become part of the kind of norm of discussion within departments. And we want fellows to not just be about like, okay, here are strategies and tips and tricks for becoming a good teacher, but thinking about what they can do to start to shift the department culture to be one that is more interested in supporting effective teaching. So what do some of these things actually like look like? So some examples of things that TDFs have done. So I would say the thing that I imagined most TDFs would be doing when I started up this program was workshops. So you either tailor a workshop that you might have done with the TLL, or you design a new workshop on a teaching topic that you're interested in to put on for your peers. So this might be workshops on topics like how to be an effective mentor, how to use active learning as a TA, a sort of bread and butter teaching workshop. Um, in lieu of workshops, sometimes TDFs have put together panels of different kinds as a way of connecting people within the department. So sometimes this means faculty panels, so convening faculty members in your department who are thought to be effective teachers and either having a particular topical panel to approach them with or something a little bit more open-ended. One thing I'll say that has been great about the faculty panels that I've observed is like basically universally at every single faculty panel, as it's wrapping up, the faculty members say, "This was really fun. We never talked to each other about teaching. I'm so glad we had a chance to do this." So, that's maybe in addition to like building that culture of reflective teaching and discussion of teaching among graduate students, it can also happen amongst the faculty in the department through the efforts of the TDS. Peer panels is another type of panel that is sometimes put on. So, especially maybe more senior or later program graduate students who have TA'd a couple of times in the department might get together and share some of the things that they've learned to maybe especially more junior or first time TAs in the department. I guess another kind of panel that has sometimes happened is alumni panels. So I think maybe especially if you are thinking about the different sorts of teaching opportunities or careers that might involve teaching that graduate students could go on to do after they leave MIT, it can sometimes be effective to convene alumni who now are teaching at different kinds of institutions um, uh, uh, to share like what is their path, what is their sort of like life in teaching look like at that institution. Um, so another way that TDFs in the past have tried to develop teaching in their departments is by setting up peer teaching or teaching observation programs. Sometimes this means like organizing kind of peer-to-peer observations. Sometimes this means actually doing a bunch of observations and feedback themselves, more like a teaching consultant. They've also designed those teach-off competitions that I talked about on a previous slide. From t so, the other thing that sometimes happens is TDFs will think, I don't know if like an event is the right way to go in my department. Maybe people are already overbooked, or there are already too many events, or maybe the situation in your department is that oftentimes people are off campus or in different time zones or whatever. Sometimes developing resources can be a way to sort of serve your department as a TDF. So maybe TA handbook or a set of web resources that TAs might draw on. Several years ago, a TDF had an email newsletter that she called TA Tidbits, which was about like really timely, little bits of advice for the TAs as they move through the semester. So think about like at the very beginning of the semester, it was like how to set up your class for success on the first day. Around midterm, it was like how to be efficient at giving feedback because everybody's midterm assignments are coming in, or towards the end, how to solicit, good feedback on your teaching so that you can grow and develop. And I would say a final category of things that TDFs have been involved in are more like behind the scenes systemic things. So maybe things that are a little bit less, okay, I'm doing an event for my peers, but I am serving on some teaching related committee in my department, or I'm working with the faculty and administrators in my department to identify ways to improve the TA situation in my department. So maybe this is about a particular example that I'm thinking of is advising on how the TA selection process works. So several years ago now, in chemical engineering, one of the TDFs basically created this survey to solicit like what people's experience was as a TA. And one of the things that the survey identified was that the process by which TAs were assigned to specific courses was really unclear, and that it was pretty frequent that like people would like look with envy at each other's TA assignments. Just because I see your face because your camera's on Atlayer, it's like Ashley saying, "Oh, I really wish I was TAing Ben's class," and Ben says, "Well, I really wish I was TAing Ashley's class," and wondering, "Well, how did this happen then?" And then a subsequent TDF actually created a whole system for collecting preferences, which with this kind of evidence that this was a challenge that the TAs were facing, it actually led to the department implementing this system subsequently as they made the assigned TAs to specific classes. Another thing that this can look like is just providing feedback to the department on TA experience, possibly through a survey, possibly through focus groups. So again, and I think these really can fall under that goal of developing a culture of reflective teaching, right? If there are systemic challenges in the teaching life for graduate students, then providing feedback to the department on ways that they might be able to improve in a way that is like distant from the individual, right? Because you are representing other people. And so it's maybe easier to give feedback when contrasting when you are just wanting to give feedback because you don't know if you're just going to be seen as like a whiner or something. So that's actually a service and a good service that I think TDFs can provide. Okay, so before we move on to our question break, I would like to introduce Hope, who is one of our TDFs this semester. Um, Thank you so much, Hope, for joining us for this brief meeting. I wanted to give you a chance to share a little bit about what your experience has been like as a TDF and what your activities have looked like. So you can sort of start wherever you want with that.
Okay, so what has it looked like and what have I done?
Yeah, yeah. Or we
Okay.
can start maybe with what motivated you to want to be a TDF in the first place.
Yeah, so I'm pretty like gung ho, pretty into teaching, I would say. But I feel like in my department, which is the EECS department, like there's not as many people that are like as into education. And so I was like, well, I can like talk to professors, I guess, about their teaching philosophies, but it doesn't like really feel like a peer relationship sometimes. And so I was looking for like, oh, it would be nice to like talk to other people who are interested in teaching and like get their thoughts and kind of like learn from their experiences. So that's kind of what motivated me to join. And there's weekly meetings where we kind of go around and talk about like what we're doing and what challenges we're facing. And so I've gotten a lot of that out of those weekly discussions. And I guess I also was already kind of like doing a lot of extra things and I was like, well, I might as well like get paid for it. Like since a lot of these extra things that I'm doing kind of falls under the like TDF uh umbrella anyway. And so let's see, as a TDF, like what things have I done?
Yeah,
Uh
it's good
so
to maybe summarize the different projects and activities that you've been working on.
yeah, so I organized a workshop that I presented yesterday, 2 days ago, on teaching in the age of AI, which kind of like allowed me to synthesize some thoughts on like what skills and like reflections are necessary as we, I don't know, encounter the challenges and opportunities that AI faces brings to teaching. And then I organized a panel over IAP about teaching computer science in the age of AI. So I recruited some professors in the department and tried to like get a range of like both very pro AI and kind of like more hesitant towards AI and kind of like talked about their like interventions and how those things went and got a bunch of faculty and TAs to attend that. In the fall, I did some peer teaching observations. I TA for 6101 and I kind of managed staff training. And so I wanted to go to like office hours and observe individual staff members and give them feedback. And so I did that for a few weeks before it kind of became overwhelming on my schedule, but I think it was still a good thing to do. And I've been refining the like staff notes that I give my TAs and other lab assistants, and I've been trying to like mentor another TA who's interested in teaching and kind of like giving him feedback on his as he's revising those things and connecting him to the TDF. and whatnot. And I'm also involved in like the AI committee on like teaching, learning, and research. So I'm doing some stuff behind the scenes, and I've been trying to talk to students about their perceptions of AI and kind of like what policies they want MIT to set around AI use and what they think professors are doing maybe effectively or ineffectively. And I've met with the graduate student union and kind of like given them feedback on some of their like TA policies, which I think are like some of which I think are like good and useful, and some of which I think are like overly restrictive. So I've done like a variety of things.
I'll say that Hope is maybe doing more than than an average TDF would be expected to do in this role, but I think you've done a really good job of like giving a really good sense of the breadth of things that a TDF might do. I think you're doing a little bit of everything, but even, I think as so for the folks who are at this meeting or watching the recording, like as you think about what your sort of role as a TDF would be, I am here, Natalie and I are happy to support you in sort of like doing as much teaching advocacy in your department as you want to. But I would say my sense hope is that your experience is like very much like a go-getter, gung ho, as you said. Can you share a little bit about like what your experience has been like as a TDF, like what things you feel like you've gained from it?
So I think that like first of all, like Ben and Nat are like fantastic resources in terms of like they really know like what they're doing. And so it's been useful like as I've been like kind of like like planning things to like get feedback from them and from the other students about like how like like when I was organizing a panel, I've never organized a panel before. So like getting feedback on them of like, okay, how do I structure this? Like how do I like reach out to people was super useful. And I think you know, I think it's um been useful in the sense of like getting a sense of perspective that I thought, eeks, wow, we had a bad. And then I like meet people in Sloan who are like, I'm like drowning under all of the essays I have to grade, and I'm like, oh, maybe like I'm not like maybe this isn't so bad. So like, so I think like a sense of perspective maybe, and just like maybe diversity of like experiences. Like I've TA'd the same class for like so many semesters, and getting a sense for like, okay, like some professors like really treat TAs like as if they're just like there to grade, versus like when you're like leading recitation versus like when you're like helping out with like a lab class, just like how different the TA experience can be and how like hard it is to kind of like meet like even within the same department there will sometimes be TAs that are fitting into all of those roles, and so like how difficult it is to like support and meet all of their needs. I think is also we also had another workshop where like all of the TDS kind of like gave like little like micro like how to be a good TA or like TA tips to each other, and I learned a lot from like kind of like the hacks that like other people have figured out through their TA journey.
Awesome. So before we move on to the kind of rest of, is there anything else you wanted to say, Hope? Okay. So before we move on to the rest of the slide deck, I wanted to maybe take a beat for questions. So are there any questions so far? Like, I think we'll talk over the next few slides about like some of the details of like kind of the logistics and, administration of the program, as well as the application and selection process. But in terms of like what it's like to be a TDF, the scope and goals of the program, do any of the folks here have any questions? You can either raise your hand and just unmute yourself, or just unmute yourself and ask, or you can drop it in the chat. Okay. In that case, I'll continue with, oh, here we go. So the question that is in the chat is, I was wondering how responsive departments generally are to TDFs, especially with respect to systemic change. I would say probably more responsive than you would expect. Departments have to sort of buy in to having a TDF in their department, like financially, like it's small, but like they are on the hook for like a couple $1,000s to support your work as a TDF. Um, and I do think that departments are like honestly interested in understanding more about like what the TA experience is like. Um, I think that sometimes, I would say that if I was counseling a TDF on this topic, I would say like it is better to go in and imagine your role as the representative of the challenges that the graduate students are facing more than the I have the solution that you must do. I think you can be open to sharing the things that maybe were indicated by the conversations that you had with the students. But I think like by and large, like departments are interested in wanting to make sure that the TA experience for their grad students is a good one. And so I think especially if you can point to this is the particular challenge that graduate students have expressed to me, this is the like actionable change that I would propose, and especially if it is and here is I have done most of the work as my TDF project, and all you have to do is say, yes, we are going to continue doing this. My experience so far is that departments are pretty receptive. Any other questions? Awesome. All right. So continuing on with my slide deck here, time commitment and support. So I would say the general expectation is that TDFs will spend an average of about 8 to 10 hours a month on activities related to the TDF program. So this includes attending these weekly cohort meetings that Hope alluded to. So um, when you're in the TDF network, you attend a weekly meeting with about 4 or 5 other TDFs from different departments. Sometimes the TDFs themselves kind of take the lead in presenting works in progress or bringing kind of particular challenges that they're facing as they're doing their TDF activities to kind of brainstorm and get some advice. Sometimes they are a little bit more like workshops that Natalie and I run, or sometimes other TDFs. Sometimes they are more like, article clubs or journal clubs where we'll circulate something to read the week before, and then we'll use that meeting to talk about whatever's in that sort of reading. So I would say that's like the main kind of like engagement with other TDFs and with the TLL aspect of the program. Then there's also going to be sort of various kinds of planning and logistics, as well as if you're doing events, facilitating the actual events. And so this is why we say an average of 8 to 10 hours a month, because there will be some months where a TDF, maybe the only thing they do is come to the cohort meetings. They don't have any events that month. And so it's mostly just those, 4 hours plus, whatever, a little bit of extra time preparing for those meetings. But then there might be another month where they have an event where they're like doing all of the logistics and planning the facilitation and doing a bunch of emails and advertising, where they might work more than 10 hours a month. But we've kind of done a bunch of assessments over time, and we think that about 8 to 10 hours a month is I would say a normal TDF workload. The support that you get as a participant in this program, first of all, there's financial support. So TDFs are supported by fellowship funding from their departments, which is dispersed in 3 chunks in August, January, and June, outside of the academic semester. Um, TDFs also receive a discretionary budget of about $100 per semester for events from the TLL. So this is like you want to have cookies or you want to get donuts and coffee for your TA workshop or whatever. We have some money to support you in that. And I'll also say like departments are usually pretty happy to supplement that if you feel that you need that. Although there is opportunity to apply for additional funds for events with the TLL or guidance on obtaining some external funds. Um, in terms of programmatic support, during the spring and fall, TDFs register for a 2 credit subject, which is basically to account for the time that they spend doing the activities of a TDF during the semester. You receive peer support from your fellows, sort of guided by those cohort meetings, as well as guidance and mentorship from TLL staff. And I would say, too, in the last couple of years, the program has really developed to in not just a like, okay, we're supporting TDFs to go out and do stuff in their departments, but we're also helping TDFs continue to grow. in their understanding of effective teaching and learning, which is what I think Natalie and I try to take a responsibility for. Okay, so that's kind of the details of the program. I think it can be helpful. I just want to share like kind of the process by which fellow selection occurs. So the applications are open now, and you can complete an application by visiting the website where you found this Zoom link. Um, Once the applications are completed, I do a sort of initial screen just to make sure that there aren't any applications that are like, for some reason, not uh, eligible to even be reviewed. And then those applications are blind reviewed by TLL staff and committees of current TDFs. So the review process is a blind one. Strong applicants are then selected, and then a recommendation is forwarded to the departments for approval, right? So I said on the previous slide that that sort of $2,100 in fellowship funding comes from departments. So basically, we review the applications, identify the strong candidates, and then propose those to the departments, and then the departments have to get back to us. So this is also kind of a long way of me saying there's usually like at least a month of time between the close of applications and when you hear from me about whether or not you've been selected, because a lot of gears have to turn between the close of applications and the confirmation of fellows. I want to say too a little bit about like what makes for a strong application. So I would say when the rubric that the committees use when they're reviewing the applications prioritizes having like a specific description of the challenges to develop teaching skills within your department, as well as a specific plan to address those problems. So we found that like what we're looking for is a kind of vision or that is sort of specific in terms of what someone imagines they'll do as a TDF. Of course, as you learn more and as you get more engaged with the program, that can change. But I think initially what we're looking for is someone to be thinking not just like, yeah, I'll figure it out, but like to have something in mind, either in terms of that specific challenge that you want to try to address and or the specific plan that you have to approach it. We are looking for a strong sense of like the logistical needs for planning and executing an event in your department. Do you know the person to email if you need to book a room? Do you know the person to get in touch with if you need to circulate a message to the graduate students? Or do you know what the other ways that you have to circulate those messages? Um, an evidence-based understanding of what makes for effective teaching. So this usually will come through the completion of TLL programs, either the Kaufman Teaching Certificate Program or the Grad Teaching Development tracks. I would say these are a preferred qualification, not a required qualification. It is possible to be selected as a TDF even if you haven't completed those programs. But if you do, we basically ask you to like hustle and get them done fast so that you are prepared to represent those ideas to your colleagues as a TDF. And then at least one semester of TAing or similar teaching experience. And this, I think, really comes from, it will help you be credible in engaging with other TAs if you have had the experience of either TAing in your department or having some kind of like real life teaching experience. And it's not just the ideas that you've gotten from the KTCP. It also can be helpful to have some experience with other sorts of leadership positions in the department, whether that is working on some sort of graduate student committee or engage in some other kind of activity. So an application, I don't think that you need to have like tons of demonstrated evidence on every single one of these points in order for it to be considered a quality application. But knowing what the work of a TDF looks like, these are the sorts of things that we are looking for evidence of when we're determining whether or not we think someone is likely to succeed in this role. Because I would say the main function in reviewing the applications is to make sure that we both are identifying someone who's going to be able to bring something valuable to the department, but also isn't just going to kind of like flounder and not be able to be successful, while at the same time identifying what are those gap areas that we can help them develop while they're a TDF. Um, Finally, I would say I would encourage you to identify possible at-large topics or audiences that you might be interested in. So I would say usually at-large fellows are chosen because there are multiple strong applications from one department. Typically, there will be only one teaching development fellow per department. Um, but if we get a bunch of strong applications from a department or several strong applications from a department, it can be hard for us to say no to two people who we think would be really successful in this program. And so one of them may take what is called an at-large position, where instead of thinking about their particular department, they are instead thinking about a particular topic or a more specific audience, and then creating institute-wide programs that address those people. So for instance, this semester or this year, we have one teaching development fellow who is an at-large fellow supporting ESL TAs. So addressing the particular challenges of teaching in something that isn't your native language, and kind of responding to those particular challenges. Okay, so with those additional details, what other questions do you have for me?